time to move on to our Focus report, which takes us to India this Friday. In 2008, the Indian government announced the launch of an identity card drive and promised that within a decade, every citizen would be provided with a unique ID number. That number in question was linked to an individual's biometric data, fingerprints and iris scans, and over 1 billion Indians have now received their cards. But today the government is going a step further by linking many social welfare schemes to this massive biometric database. For example, a person can be given access to a fuel subsidy with a simple fingerprint check. The aim of the scheme is to reduce corruption and misappropriation of public funds by middlemen, but also to increase digital transparency in commercial transactions. However, some are asking whether this is a case of too much government regulation, and privacy advocates are calling this the world's largest mass surveillance project. Well, our correspondents Madhukini Galat, Suhail Khan, Surabhi Tandon and Constantin Simon tell us more about this debate between easy access to welfare schemes and the right to privacy.
Over 1 million people live in Old Delhi. Mohammad Tashif reckons he's met most of them. A chicken seller by day, he uses his shop every evening to enroll citizens into what has become the world's largest identification program. Launched in 2008, Aadhaar aims to provide an identification number to each of India's 1.3 billion people. It also records every individual's fingerprints and iris scans for the government's massive database.
Okay, now put the fingers of your right hand.
In a country where many people don't have any identity document, this is a revolution.
I want to enroll my 3-year-old daughter in school. They told me I can't do it without my Aadhaar card, so I desperately need it.
The government has now made Aadhaar mandatory for availing subsidies on food and fuel, for opening bank accounts, and for getting a mobile phone connection. It's hoped that soon most commercial transactions will be done using Aadhaar-based applications. Toshif also believes it will eradicate another menace.
Crime will also decrease because of this. If someone commits a crime and he leaves behind a fingerprint, and if he also has an Aadhaar card or registration, then he will be easily caught.
Not everyone agrees with him. Aruna Roy, one of the most prominent social activists in the country, is a crucial member of the small but vocal anti-Aadhaar movement.
What do you think?
Like you were talking about how the problem with Aadhaar being used for mass surveillance and it becoming like a Big Brother project.
Because Big Brother is not watching you in a room through a television, but is watching through the biometric system and through Aadhaar and through data. Every single thing you do, where you go, when you buy a ticket, when you buy a gas for your cooking, when you are going to the bank, when you do a bank transaction, your calls are all monitored. So what is left? So it's a complete invasion of privacy.
In fact, the country's highest court has ruled at least 6 times that the government cannot make the Aadhaar card mandatory for distributing social benefits.
Instead, the case has now been referred to a constitutional bench which will rule on the question of privacy.
For privacy advocates, one of the biggest concerns is that the Indian government has hired foreign companies to collect the data. These companies, like the French multinational Safran, often have deep ties to the defense and intelligence industries in their country. But their director dismisses those fears.
Safran has been present in India for a long, long time. So we are, we are foreign, we have a foreign ownership, but we are Indian.
Safran has a treasure at its disposal. Sensitive information about millions of Indians. If leaked, this information would be of enormous value to businesses looking to market to Indian consumers.
So first of all, the data is not held with us. All the data is in the possession of and control of the authority. As an individual, a question comes to my mind that perhaps Google or Facebook or any other social network where we today operate, they know more about us already.
Privacy concerns aside, the program is also being criticized for its implementation at the ground level.
You should wash your hands before you come here.
I've scrubbed them with soap.
No amount of washing his hands has helped Mohammed Taim. For the last 2 months, he hasn't received any food from the government because his fingerprints don't match his biometric information in the Aadhaar database.
It's already happened to me 3 times that I've been denied ration. My hands are in a bad condition because I am a daily labourer. They are cheating people. We don't get any food.
The government hopes to fix these glitches soon. Meanwhile, the direct transfer of state benefits through Aadhaar-based services has already helped India save 5 billion euros that would have otherwise been lost due to corruption.
Well, for more on this, let's cross to our guest, Asian politics expert DBS Anand. Hello, thank you for being with us. From the point of view of rights groups, beyond understandable glitches, there seems to be a number of concerns. Let's start with that of surveillance. Now, the justification there is the fight against terrorism and corruption. Is it an efficient solution on either count?
Not at all. In fact, if you look at the actual statistics in India, you'll find that the biggest source of terrorism lies with the right-wing Hindu nationalist movement. So what's happening now in case of India is that Muslims in particular, but Muslims and Dalits are being bullied and being killed by Hindu nationalists on the accusation that they're eating beef or they're, let's say, transporting cow. Now, these kind of terrorism would not be resolved through, for instance, Aadhaar, the national identity scheme. Second, when you look at the biggest source of killing in India, again, it is caste-based violence. That would not be resolved because the regime that's bringing in this compulsory identification is a regime that is actually Hindu nationalist, a right-wing Hindu nationalist. So that would not be resolved. Now, this kind of surveillance may lead to a situation where, for instance, the police can find the perpetrators of certain crimes more easily, no doubt. But India, as we saw yesterday from UN Human Rights meeting, India is also one of the countries that has not ratified, let's say, the Convention on Torture, Convention Against Torture. So India, in that case, also allows for impunity to its own police and armed forces to commit crimes against the people. Now, these kind of schemes of identification are not going to help in removing corruption because the biggest source of corruption and biggest source of terrorism in India lies with the state, not against the state.
That's right, because corrupt elements can just adapt to the new circumstances, can't they?
It is, you see, that's right. Of course, the report talked about £5 billion of savings and everything, that's fine. But when we look at the corporate corruption and when we look at the corruption of the state, and in this case, we are talking about tens of billions of, let's say, pounds, dollars, whatever currency you use, being lost because the state and the corporations are in cahoots here. So with this kind of identification scheme, what's likely to happen is there will be more surveillance against the dissenters, more surveillance against civil society members, more surveillance against the poor without any tangible benefit for the wider society.
But does India actually have the intelligence capabilities to truly keep an eye on so many citizens?
Well, it does. You see, you have to understand that, again, terrorism or war against terrorism throughout the different countries has proven to be quite useful tool by the state to put surveillance on its own people. We haven't seen terrorism going down because of these kind of surveillance, but it has allowed the state to become more powerful. Now, in Indian context, as I said, the biggest source of terrorism in contemporary times is terrorism coming from Hindu nationalist groups. The Hindu national groups are in the government, and therefore, there is no evidence that surveillance by the state would be against those groups because they are very much in the government.
And in a different type of terrorism, could piracy, hacking not also become an issue?
They could, but again, in Indian context, no doubt, as I said, these schemes or even surveillance can help the state, let's say 10 to 15% or even 20%, I'm giving a rough estimate, in terms of providing security to the wider country. But the question in a democracy, and India is a democracy technically, right? Question in a democracy is, again, the balance between surveillance on the people and, of course, surveillance on the state, or rather, accountability of the state. Now, these kind of schemes make the state even more unaccountable while putting people under surveillance. And in a democracy, that should be unacceptable.
And this, of course, is being linked to social benefits. Is that a good thing?
Now, in terms of social benefits, okay, India being largely a poor country, because majority of the poor people in India are poor, we find that there are government schemes that are supposed to help the poor. And as your report rightly pointed out, there are some schemes that are available for the very poor. But the reality is, for instance, there are tens of millions of people who are homeless, those who live on the street. Now, this kind of scheme requires not only, let's say, the biometric identification, but also some form of address. Right now, the poorest people would not have those forms of identity. Therefore, these kind of schemes are likely to help maybe the lower middle classes to an extent, but the very poorest would be left out. So what we are going to have in India is, again, the government speaking in the name of the poor, but actually helping the middle classes and the lower middle classes, while the very poor get lost.
So are there no upsides to this scheme?
No, again, I said, with such schemes, if you had a proper democratic accountability, right? For instance, if the state can be held accountable, that the state can be taken to judiciary. And as we see again with this report, Supreme Court has made it very clear that this particular scheme should not be used for welfare-based schemes. And yet the government is pushing for it. And the government is able to push for it because in India what we find is a rise of right-wing Hindu majoritarianism, what we are calling Hindu nationalism. And they are very keen that they have to have almost authoritarian kind of control in the country, very much like Erdogan in Turkey, by the way. Right? Similar kind of trend is in India. So I don't see this scheme as actually benefiting the majority of the people, while it's going to strengthen the Indian state, which is actually right now controlled by the right-wing Hindu nationalists, and it's going to benefit the corporations that will be involved in such schemes. But I don't see it as bringing any tangible benefit for the ordinary people.
Dibyesh Anand, thank you very much for your analysis. And that's where we're leaving this hour live from Paris. But stay tuned, we'll have a full news update for you at the top of the hour.